He fled from the pain consuming him, retreating to the most isolated barn on his own ranch, only to find something that would change his life forever. A desperate mother with a newborn in her arms, hiding in the shadows of damp hay. Can you imagine being so broken inside that you lock yourself away in an abandoned barn like a wounded animal, only to discover that fate has sent you exactly what you fear and need the most all at once? But this story actually happened on October 17th, 1879, during a night of apocalyptic storms deep in the Colorado Territory, nestled between the Rocky Mountain foothills and the settlement of Stony Creek. Before we continue this narrative, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like down below, because the ending of this story is going to surprise you in ways you never imagined. What Rafe found in that barn didn't just change his destiny, but that of an entire community that was watching his slow and silent destruction. And tell me in the comments which city or state you're watching this story from. I love knowing where these narratives travel and touch hearts across the world. The rain fell like divine punishment that night of October 17th, 1879, turning the red dirt of the Twin Pines Ranch into a sticky mud that sucked at horses' hooves and swallowed wagon wheels whole. The wind howled through the tall cottonwoods like lost souls, ripping away leaves that flew like green ghosts against a black sky, torn apart by lightning that illuminated, for fractions of a second, the absolute chaos all around. Thunder rumbled so hard it made the ground shake, as if the earth itself were in pain from the celestial violence pouring down from the heavens. The air smelled of burnt ozone, soaked earth, and something metallic, like blood, about to be spilled on wet soil. Rafe Sutton rode against the tempest, mounted on Thunder, his 8-year-old black stallion that had already saved his life twice during bad accidents out on the range. Rafe was a full 38 years old, but that night he looked 60 from the suffering accumulated on his face. A weeks-old beard shadowed a strong jawline, now hollowed by the chronic pain that corroded his soul day after day. His brown eyes, once full of life and an easy laughter that won anyone over, now carried the dead weight of a man who had buried essential pieces of himself and never managed to recover them. His white linen shirt, which Mary had sewn with care for his 36th birthday, was torn at both sleeves, stained with mud and sweat, clinging to the broad chest of a man who still carried the muscles of someone who had tamed wild lands with his own hands. His leather boots, cracked at the heels from lack of care, splashed through the mud with every heavy step of the horse. Rafe didn't feel the biting cold pricking the exposed skin of his neck and arms, nor did he notice the icy water running down his back and soaking his heavy denim trousers. He felt only the immense void driving him toward the ranch's farthest barn, the one located at the very edge of the property, a mile and a half from the main house, where no one had set foot for over a full year. Rafe wasn't always like this, a living ghost haunting his own lands like a lost spirit. A year and a half ago, or more precisely 18 months and 12 days to be exact, his life was full of meaning and hope. He was a respected rancher in Stony Creek, owner of 500 acres of fertile land, some planted with wheat, but mostly grazing land for 120 head of Hereford cattle. He kept a drove of hogs that he sold for a profit at the market in Denver every month, and he had a large 2-story house with a hardwood porch that Mary had painted light blue with her own hands. Smiling while she worked, Rafe met Mary when he was 25 at a lively 4th of July barn dance in the town square. She was only 19 that night, with long black hair that fell in natural curls to her narrow waist, green eyes that seemed to smile before her lips even moved, and wearing a flowered dress that twirled beautifully when she danced the reel with her friends. He courted her for 6 whole months, carefully bringing wildflowers picked from the woods every week, learning to play the guitar on his own just to impress her with serenades, and he asked for her hand in marriage, kneeling in the town church with Reverend Anthony as a solemn witness to the moment. They married in December of 1861 in a memorable feast with a whole roasted hog, tall cornbread cakes layered with fruit preserves, and they danced until the sun rose, tinting the sky orange over the mountains. Mary transformed the big house into a true home in the following years. She planted a whole garden of red roses right in front of the porch, embroidered light cotton curtains that danced beautifully in the morning breeze, cooked a campfire stew seasoned with bacon that made all the ranch hands come back, asking for seconds with wide smiles, and sang old childhood songs while washing clothes in the crystal-clear creek that ran at the back of the property. Rafe expanded the ranch with hard work and careful planning. He bought more land from neighboring ranches that were failing, brought in experienced hands who knew everything about cattle drives, and built a new modern grain silo that doubled their efficiency in 2 years. Prosperity grew like the lush crops in the green fields. In 1870 came the pregnancy they had waited for so long. Mary glowed like never before during those months, her face illuminated by deep happiness, and she embroidered a complete layette with the monogram RS for Rafe Sutton Jr. Rafe planned to teach the boy to ride by his 3rd birthday, thought about taking him to the great cattle fair in Cheyenne when he turned 10, imagined his son working beside him in the golden fields. But on April 2nd, 1878, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, when the sky cried as much as it would on that night in October, everything ended brutally and irreversibly. Rafe was in Denver closing an important deal selling 80 head of prime cattle when the tragedy struck the ranch at noon. Mary felt the pains begin while watering the roses in the front garden. She screamed desperately for Ms. Rose, the kind neighbor who lived 2 properties over, but the labor came too fast, too premature, too violent. The boy was born blue and lifeless, with the umbilical cord wrapped 3 times around his tiny neck. Mary held the cold little body against her chest for exactly 23 minutes, singing softly the same lullaby the sun would never hear in full, tears mixing with the blood of childbirth. Ms. Rose arrived running and breathless with the town doctor, but it was already too late to save the child. Mary looked at the ceiling of the house with eyes already glazing over, whispered with the last strength she had, asking the Lord to take her along with her son, and closed her eyes forever, departing this world without waiting for Rafe to return. When Rafe returned 3 days later, riding happily and thinking of embracing his pregnant wife, he found only 2 fresh graves, side by side in the ranch's private cemetery, dug beneath the century-old oak tree that Mary loved so much and where she liked to sit on hot summer afternoons. They buried them both without him, without waiting, without giving him the chance for a goodbye. Reverend Anthony said with a measured voice that it had been God's will, that the Lord's ways are mysterious. Rafe said God was cruel and unjust, spat on the church floor, and never went back for Sunday service. In the following months, Rafe sold the belongings of the big house piece by piece, as if selling pieces of his own soul. The guitar Mary loved to play was given to Jeb, the loyal ranch hand who had worked there for 15 years. The light blue wedding dress, kept with such care in the cedar chest, was donated to the church. He fired all the house staff and field hands, except for faithful Jeb, who stubbornly insisted on staying to watch the storehouse and take care of the bare minimum. Rafe locked the big house with 7 heavy iron padlocks, swearing aloud that he would never set foot in those rooms full of memories that hurt like knife wounds in his chest. He moved to the back barn, the most distant and forgotten one, where mouldy hay and rusted tools became his living tomb. He lived on hardtack, dry cheese that lasted weeks, and cheap whiskey that Jeb left at the door without saying a single word, respecting the silent mourning. Rafe hadn't been to town in 14 full months. He didn't eat with anyone. He didn't sleep properly on the makeshift straw bed without dreaming of Mary calling the name of the son they never truly got to know. That barn was a living ruin that mirrored the state of Rafe's soul, built in 1842 by Rafe's grandfather. It was made of rough timber, reinforced with thick logs, covered by a shingle roof that now creaked dangerously under the weight of the violent storm. It measured 40 feet long by 25 wide, space enough to shelter 40 head of cattle in the dry winters of old. But now it sheltered only 7 skinny cows that Rafe milked more out of obligation than will. Piles of hay rotting slowly in damp corners, an old broken wagon missing its 2 front wheels, rusty scythes hanging from the high beams by worn ropes, and heavy air that smelled of penetrating mold, dry manure, and damp wood that would never dry properly again. Rafe tied Thunder outside the barn, under a makeshift shelter made of torn canvas that barely managed to protect the animal from the oblique rain beating sideways. He entered through the double wooden doors, swollen by chronic humidity, closing them with the heavy iron latch that must have weighed 30 pounds. He lit the kerosene lantern, which flickered strongly with the wind infiltrating through the numerous cracks in the poorly sealed walls. The interior was chaos illuminated in orange tones by the weak and dancing light of the flame. Large bales of hay collapsing from piles 10 feet high, a fat rat running hurriedly along an exposed beam. The skinny cows mooing restlessly in the makeshift corral of poles tied with wire. Rafe took off his soaked hat, shook off the accumulated water which formed an immediate puddle on the dirt floor. He sat heavily on a rough wooden bench near the door, leaning his aching back against the cold wall that dripped with rhythmic leaks. He grabbed the flask of whiskey from the dusty shelf, drank a long gulp that burned his parched throat like fire going down his gullet. The alcohol didn't warm his body like before. It only numbed him enough not to remember so clearly Mary's pale face lying in those 2 cold graves. It was exactly then that he heard the strange sound for the first time. At first, he thought it was just the wind groaning in the high, rickety beams. But the sound came again, clearer this time, a sharp, broken cry, too human to be any animal he knew. It was the cry of a small child, a newborn baby. Rafe froze on the bench, the flask stopped halfway to his mouth, his heart racing for the first time in months. Impossible. No one had come to that abandoned barn for so long. Even Jeb barely appeared there, leaving things at the entrance and leaving quickly. The cry came once more, now clearer and more desperate, coming from the dark back of the barn, from somewhere behind the largest pile of hay that completely blocked the view of the back wall. Rafe grabbed the double-barreled shotgun he always kept loaded with buckshot within arm's reach, balanced the kerosene lantern in his trembling left hand. He walked slowly across the uneven floor, boots splashing in the internal puddles formed by constant leaks, heart beating strong for the first time in months, a mix of fear and strange curiosity taking over his empty chest. The smell inside the barn changed gradually as he approached the back. Mixed with the familiar mold came a different smell of sour milk, fresh human sweat, of raw and palpable fear in the humid air. He carefully navigated around the huge pile of hay, raising the lantern to better illuminate what was hidden in the shadows. The yellow, oscillating light of the flame revealed a makeshift burrow dug into the middle of the fresh hay, looking like the den of a large, cornered animal. And there, curled up in that damp and suffocating darkness, was her. She was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 24 years old. Her face completely dirty with mud, mixed with dried tears, forming tracks on her cheeks, brown hair matted and stuck to her sweaty forehead, wearing a simple grey cotton dress torn badly at the left shoulder, revealing a purple and yellow bruise, exactly the size of a closed adult fist. In her uncontrollably trembling arms, wrapped in a cloth dirty with dried blood that must have been white once, was a tiny newborn baby. Skin almost transparent, it was so pale, whimpering weakly with little eyes squeezed shut against the sudden light of the lantern. The woman lifted her devastated face when the direct light hit her, brown eyes widening in pure and absolute terror, her whole body shrinking even further against the packed earth wall behind her, as if she could disappear into the wet clay. "Don't kill me, mister," she pleaded with a voice completely hoarse and broken, almost inaudible under the sound of thunder rumbling outside. "Please, I beg you, don't kill me. The baby is innocent. He ain't done nothing wrong." Rafe felt the entire world spin violently around him. The shotgun weighed as if it were made of molten lead in his right hand. That heartbreaking scene in front of him hit him like a lightning bolt squarely in the chest. Mother and son, the most absolute fragility possible against his armed isolation and self-imposed pain. The baby made an even weaker sound, almost a broken sigh, and something deep inside Rafe's empty chest broke once and for all. The woman's name was Annie Claire. She was a full 24 years old, but looked like she had lived at least 50 years of suffering in the last 15 days. Born right there in the settlement of Stony Creek, the only daughter of a humble washerwoman and a poor stonemason, she had learned to wash heavy clothes in the freezing creek since she was 9 years old, working beside her mother every day. She married at 17 to John Ferreira, known throughout the region as Mad Jack Ferris, a ranch hand from the neighboring property, well known for violent bar fights and the cheap moonshine he drank ceaselessly. At the beginning of the marriage, everything seemed good and promising. Jack brought fresh fish from the river home every week, built rustic hardwood furniture that Annie painted with care, worked hard in the fields, and came back tired but smiling. But after the first year of marriage came the sickly and violent jealousy. Jack started beating Annie because of innocent glances she exchanged with neighbors at the town market, for casual conversations with the baker or the blacksmith, for wearing clothes that were too clean which, according to him, attracted compliments and covetous looks from other men. Annie got pregnant at 23, hid the pregnancy for fear of what Jack might do, but the labor came premature and unavoidable exactly 15 days ago, on a night of a full moon that illuminated the entire high plains around them. Miguel was born alive by a pure divine miracle, weighing only 4.5 pounds, too weak to nurse properly at his exhausted and bruised mother's breast. Jack discovered the birth the next day when he returned drunk from the general store, drank 2 whole bottles of rot-gut whiskey, and came home screaming like a madman that the baby was the foreman's son, that Annie had betrayed him with another man. He broke 2 of her ribs with violent kicks from heavy leather boots, opened a deep 3-inch gash on her forehead with a heavy belt buckle, and swore by the saints he would cut off the boy's head with the sharp scythe he used in the fields. Annie fled in desperation, limping and bleeding under a fine rain that began to fall, without milk in her empty breasts from so much accumulated hunger, without a certain direction or destination in mind, moved only by the most primitive animal instinct to protect her defenseless son. She walked for 5 whole miles through the dangerous, dense woods, her bare feet cut by sharp thistle thorns, finally arriving at that isolated barn, following the natural orientation of the cows, seeking shelter against the forming storm. She had hidden in the hay 4 hours before Rafe arrived, praying softly and ceaselessly for the baby to survive that cold and damp night. Rafe lowered the shotgun slowly, the lantern trembling dangerously in his left hand, the oil almost spilling. "What are you doing here?" he asked with a grave voice that came out much harsher than he actually intended, the habit of months of isolation making any conversation difficult and raspy. Annie Claire squeezed baby Miguel even tighter against her bruised chest, wide eyes fixed on the weapon Rafe held. "I'm running from my husband, mister," she whispered, trembling from head to toe. "He'll kill me if he finds me. He'll kill my boy too. I got nowhere to go, got nobody, got nothing else in this world but him." Rafe felt his stomach turn in tight knots that rose painfully up his throat. A large part of him wanted to send that woman and that baby away immediately, lock the iron door of the barn, return to his safe and known void where no one could hurt him again because he was already dead inside. But the baby opened his light grey eyes for the first time, made a sharp sound of desperate and urgent hunger, and Rafe saw with absolute clarity the face of the son he had never held in his arms, the child he never knew, the boy Mary died trying to bring into the world. "Sit over there on that bench," he ordered, pointing with the barrel of the shotgun to a drier wooden bench near the side wall. "I'll fetch clean water and something for you folks to eat." He left the barn quickly, heart racing, as if he were in the middle of a bloody battle. Miss Rose lived relatively close to the main storehouse where Jeb kept the tools, but Rafe didn't go there to ask for help. He grabbed the clean canteen he had kept on a protected external shelf, also grabbed a piece of hardtack wrapped in cotton cloth and a generous piece of fresh goat cheese that Jeb had left on the covered shelf the previous afternoon. He returned soaked to the bone by the rain that gave no truce, and found Annie Claire still curled up in the same spot, Miguel now crying more weakly, breathing too fast for such a small and fragile baby. "Drink this," he offered, extending the canteen of water to her. Annie drank with desperate avidity, the clean water running down the corners of her mouth, down a chin cracked from dehydration, wetting her torn dress. Then she wetted her fingers and gave them to the baby, who sucked weakly, without enough strength to nurse properly. "What's your full name?" asked Rafe, sitting far away, the shotgun now at his side but pointed at the dirt floor, no longer threatening directly. "Annie Claire," she replied, wiping her mouth with the torn sleeve of her dirty dress. "And his name is Miguel. He's 15 days old, born premature, real weak, barely can nurse." Rafe nodded slowly, feeling his throat close as if invisible hands were squeezing from the outside. "I'm Rafe Sutton, owner of this ranch, or at least I was the real owner once," he said with bitterness in his voice. "Why did you come to hide exactly in my abandoned barn?" Annie looked at the beaten earth floor, tears returning to flow silently down her dirty cheeks. "My husband's name is John Ferreira, but everyone knows him as Jack Ferris. He's a hand at Colonel Ramsey's ranch, violent drunk, been beating me since the second year we were wed. Today he swore to kill us, me and Miguel. Broke my ribs from kicking so much. I got no living kin, mister. My parents died of yellow fever last year. My brother went off to California looking for work and never sent word. I came here 'cause the cows came to this barn running from the rain. I figured if they sought shelter here, maybe I could hide for a night too." Rafe rubbed his tired face with calloused hands, the grown beard prickling his rough palms. "The baby needs real milk," Annie said, her voice choked with desperation and guilt. "My breasts dried up completely from so much hunger and fear. Nothing comes out anymore. And look at his fever. His little eyes are burning from the inside." Rafe felt his chest compress painfully, as if a 100-pound rock had been placed on top of his heart. There was a little goat's milk kept in the main storehouse where Jeb slept some nights, but getting that milk meant going out into the violent storm again, walking almost a mile and a half, risking the baby catching a fatal pneumonia while he was gone. "Stay here and don't go out for anything," he ordered, standing up with difficulty, his whole body aching from fatigue and tension. "I'm going to get milk and some clean rags." He went out again into the stormy night, mounted Thunder, who whinnied, scared by the thunder, and rode through the complete darkness to the main storehouse. The first night in the barn was a living hell for everyone involved. Rafe returned 40 minutes later, completely soaked to the bone, shivering from intense cold, carrying a dented tin full of still warm goat's milk, a clean cloth that had been boiled in the hand's iron pot, and a sharp knife to cut the thick fabric into smaller pieces that would serve as improvised diapers. Annie mixed the fatty milk with a little clean water from the canteen, dripped it very carefully into the baby's half-open little mouth, using a rough wooden spoon she found abandoned in a corner. Miguel sucked slowly, color returning little by little to lips that were blue from cold and hunger. But the fever continued rising dangerously as the dawn advanced cold. At 2 in the morning sharp, Miguel's tiny body began to convulse slightly, small involuntary spasms that made Annie scream in pure panic. Rafe woke up startled from the corner where he tried to sleep, wrapped in an old, smelly tarp, lit the lantern with trembling hands, and saw the rigid baby in her shaking arms. "Cold water on his forehead now," he murmured, following a paternal instinct he had never used in his life, coming from somewhere deep and unknown inside his chest. He soaked a clean cloth in the cold water from the canteen, passed it delicately over the scalding little forehead, the sweaty neck, the boy's cold feet. Gradually, very slowly, the convulsions stopped, breathing normalizing to a less frightening rhythm. But Miguel's eyes were too deep in their small sockets, skin turning yellow from late jaundice that hadn't been treated. Annie cried without making a sound, her whole body shaking violently from physical and emotional exhaustion and terrible pain in her broken ribs that throbbed with every movement. "Lie down over there on that drier hay I set aside," ordered Rafe, extending an old horse blanket he had kept in a trunk. She obeyed without questioning, lay down on her side so as not to pressure her ribs. Miguel pressed against her chest and fell into a deep sleep in less than 3 minutes of pure bodily collapse. Rafe stayed awake for the rest of the night, the loaded shotgun at his side, listening to the rain hammer ceaselessly on the roof that creaked dangerously, threatening to collapse at any moment. He thought of Mary holding that ghost son they never knew, thought of Annie Claire carrying Miguel through the dark woods bleeding and dying of fear, and thought that maybe fate was indeed cruel and unjust, but maybe it also had some hidden purpose he couldn't see yet. Dawn broke dense grey and cold, October 18th, the shy sun trying to pierce the heavy clouds that still threatened more rain. Rafe woke up with a strong pain in his back from sleeping on the hard, uneven ground, and saw Annie feeding Miguel with the fresh milk he had fetched at sunrise from the storehouse. She had washed her face in the dirty cattle trough, tried to comb her matted hair with thin fingers, and now looked a little less animal, a little more human and dignified. "Thank you, mister," she whispered when he approached slowly. "You saved my boy from death. Saved us both." Rafe just grunted an evasive answer, not knowing what to say, unable to deal with gratitude after so much time alone. Jeb arrived at noon sharp, the loyal 45-year-old ranch hand, face deeply marked by the strong sun and old smallpox scars, straw hat completely soaked. "Boss, you got folks living in your barn?" he asked with a hesitant voice, seeing the thin smoke of the makeshift fire Rafe had built to heat food. Rafe pulled him outside, away from Annie's ears, and told a summarized and short version. Woman running from a violent husband, sick newborn baby, storm caught them on the road. Jeb crossed himself with devotion. Jack Ferris, that miserable dog. He already broke a working girl's ribs in town last year. The colonel fired him, but the bastard came back a few weeks later. Dangerous man, boss. Very dangerous indeed. Rafe nodded tensely, jaw clenched. "Nobody says a word to anyone about this, and you keep an eye on the main road. If you see him or his cronies nearby, let me know on the run." Jeb left, shaking his head worriedly, but returned mid-afternoon bringing a gift. Fresh bread, cornmeal for porridge, 2 large chicken eggs, and medicinal herbs for fever tea that his mother had taught him about when he was a child. He left everything at the wooden barn door without entering, respecting the boss's known isolation. The first days brought social isolation even worse than the previous solitude. Ms. Rose, the 62-year-old widow who had lost 3 daughters to the terrible smallpox in 1865, appeared at the barn on the 3rd day, carrying a heavy pot of seasoned chicken soup and boiled clean rags. She was an old friend of Mary's, practically the only person Rafe still tolerated seeing occasionally. "Heard Jeb saying something," she said with a voice hoarse from so much pipe smoking. "Woman hiding in your barn, Rafe." Rafe let her enter through the door, suspicious but too tired to argue. Miss Rose saw Annie lying with Miguel, ribs purple and swollen, feet infected with yellow pus oozing. "Lord Almighty!" she exclaimed, crossing herself forcefully. "This here is Jack Ferris's work. I saw marks just like this on poor little Mary Ellen, who washed clothes at the town square fountain. I'm gonna bring salve for this pus and strong wormseed tea for this boy's fever." Who are you, ma'am?" asked Annie with a weak voice. "I'm Miss Rose," replied the widow. "Been a widow for 20 years. Lost my 3 girls to sickness when they were young. This ranch here needs life again, needs folks, needs hope." Rafe felt his chest tighten painfully. "Nobody stays here," he said with a dry, hard voice. Miss Rose looked firmly into his eyes without fear. "Your big pride is going to kill you and them," she retorted firmly. "At least let me help this innocent baby." Rafe relented, shaking his head tiredly. Miss Rose became a silent but efficient bridge to the town. She carried food hidden under her wide skirt, brought news without asking too many questions, told everything to Reverend Anthony, but made him swear absolute secrecy under the seal of confession. The first night of true adaptation was a complete nightmare. The roof gave way in a whole corner at 3 a.m. with a huge crash. A thick 25-foot beam collapsed with a noise that woke the cows mooing in total panic. Rainwater gushed like a violent internal waterfall, flooding the makeshift corral, hay starting to float in brown, dirty puddles. Rafe ran barefoot, lifted the heavy beam with bare shoulders, bleeding from deep scratches from wood splinters, tied everything with thick sisal rope before a new, deadly collapse could happen. Annie woke up screaming, terrified. Miguel crying hysterically at the noise. One of the brown cows escaped through the open hole and vanished completely into the dark woods. Rafe spent the whole night making repairs under the rain that continued infiltrating ceaselessly, nails turning black from so much wet earth, muscles all over his body burning as if they were on fire from the inside. When dawn finally broke, only 4 cows remained in the corral. The stored provisions had become completely soaked and started to mold. The milk they had saved soured completely. Hunger hit everyone hard. Annie was without strength to produce milk or to nurse. Miguel sucked only desperate air. Rafe divided the last hard piece of bread into 3 tiny pieces that barely curbed the hunger. Miss Rose arrived at noon, like a miracle fallen from the sky, bringing a large sack of dried manioc flour, 6 roasted sweet potatoes, and a medium pot of beans cooked in hot ash. She also brought very bad news. Jack Ferris was asking insistently at Mr. Joachim's general store about a runaway woman with a newborn baby, swearing bloody vengeance, saying loudly for everyone to hear that he would kill the landowner where he found her hiding. The first days brought a fragile but functional routine. Rafe milked the remaining cows right at sunrise, took the warm milk for Annie to boil in an old pot. She made very thin porridge for the baby using the flour Miss Rose brought, washed dirty rags in a large trough improvised from old planks. Conversations were short, and always around the central fire, protected by stretched tarps. Annie told more details of her life. She had married too young for fear of ending up a spinster. John seemed good at the start, but turned into a terrible monster with the drink. Miguel had been born weak because the drunken father beat her pregnant belly when he drank too much. Rafe listened to everything in heavy silence and only told about Mary on the 7th full day, voice choked, remembering the phantom birth he never witnessed. Annie touched his hand in a gesture of a mother, consoling a wounded father. It was the first real human touch Rafe had received in 18 whole months. He pulled his hand away quickly, startled, but the fragile seed of healing had already been planted in his dead heart. On the 8th day came the first real and concrete clue of the danger surrounding them. Jeb knocked on the wooden door at dusk, face pale as candle wax. Boss saw Jack on the back road with 2 armed cronies, big machete on his belt, asking about smoke from a distant barn. He swore if he finds his woman, he burns everything with her and the baby inside. Rafe felt his blood freeze completely in his veins. "Hide well in the high hay in the back," he ordered Annie with a hard voice. He grabbed the double barrel, the leather cartridge belt with 12 buckshot shells, and the 15-inch sharp butcher knife used for slaughtering hogs. He spent the whole night awake, watching the dark road through the narrow crack in the wooden door, fine rain returning like a grey veil covering everything. At dawn on the 9th day, 3 dark shapes appeared in the distance. 3 men on horseback, John Jack Ferris right in front mounted on a bay, dirty red beard bloodied from recent moonshine, red eyes injected with pure hate. They stopped exactly 100 yards from the barn, talked quietly amongst themselves. Rafe aimed at Jack's head through the sights of the shotgun, fingers sweating cold on the depressed trigger. But the cows mooed very loudly suddenly. The shapes mounted their startled horses and left through the side woods, vanishing quickly. False alarm this time. But the terrible tension remained in the air. Annie cried, hugging Miguel tight, ribs hurting even more with the growing fear. Rafe swore protection in silence, feeling the father instinct resurface strong from the ashes of his dead chest. On the 10th day, the baby got worse again in a frightening way. The fever returned, reaching 104 degrees on his scalding forehead. The little body began to convulse strongly at 2 in the morning, white foam appearing in the tiny mouth. Annie screamed desperately for help. Rafe ran to the horse grazing loose. He grabbed the boy, who was cold despite the high fever, rode 9 whole miles in heavy rain to Miss Rose's house, pounding hard on the wooden door at 3:15 in the morning. The widow woke up startled with the lantern trembling, saw the purplish baby, and quickly prepared a medicinal bath of boiled herbs, a strong infusion of lemon balm to control the seizure, and carefully massaged the little feet with pure copaiba oil. At 5 in the morning, finally, the terrible crisis passed, color returning slowly to the face. Rafe took Annie and Miguel back to the barn at dawn, everyone wet but alive by a miracle. "Miss," Rose whispered in the emotional farewell, "God sent them to save you, Rafe. Don't waste this grace." He didn't answer with words, but in his chest the void cracked deeper than ever. The arrival back at the barn brought a new, unexpected tragedy. The corral gate was broken open with violence. The 3 remaining cows had vanished into the dark night, probably stolen by Jack's cronies prowling the woods. Without fresh milk, without meat for slaughter, without income to buy provisions in town, Rafe punched the timber wall until his knuckles bled, roaring with mute frustration against cruel fate. Annie approached, limping slowly, damp cloth on feet, still infected. "We'll survive anyway," she said with the firm voice of a mother who had seen hell up close. God didn't abandon us this far to give up now. Rafe looked into her eyes, saw young Mary reflected there, saw a strength he himself had lost a long time ago. For the first time in 18 whole months, he slept without whiskey, just wrapped in a shared blanket near the crackling fire that warmed the fragile trio. The 12th day brought definitive and suffocating social isolation. Reverend Anthony passed by the main road with the church wagon, saw the distant smoke from the barn, sent Jeb to warn urgently. The whole town knows about the woman and baby in the cursed barn. They say Rafe went crazy for good, brought a working girl to breed more curses on the ranch. Colonel Ramsey threatens to sue for protecting Jack, who is wanted for a knife fight at the general store last year. Rafe grunted in response. "My ranch, my law." Jeb shook his head sadly but remained loyal, promising to watch all trails in the dense woods. Exploration of the barn revealed more painful clues from the past. On the 13th day, Annie, cleaning old hay, found a yellowed letter from Mary, hidden in a hollow beam that had come loose. "Rafe, if you read this, it's because I left before my time. Take care of the ranch for our children who will still come. Love you eternal. 1877. Rafe read in absolute silence, tears running down his dirty beard for the first time since the graves, chest tightening like never before. Annie hugged him from behind in solitary silence, curing open wounds without words. Baby Miguel smiled for the first time in the afternoon, little gum teeth appearing in tranquil sleep, a small but powerful sign of fragile hope sprouting. On the 14th day, Rafe decided to investigate on his own. He went out on horseback through the dense woods with the loaded shotgun, tracked fresh prints of Jack to the dry creek bed a mile away, found a recent campfire still warm, empty whiskey bottles rolling on the ground, a canteen with the name John Ferreira engraved on the metal lid. Returned sweaty and tense, told Annie the danger was real and imminent, not a drunkard's bluff. "We need a solid plan," she said, surprising him with determination of steel. "Ms. Rose can take Miguel to town, hidden in the wagon. I stay as bait to lure him." Rafe refused, vehemently shaking his head. "Nobody dies on my land while I breathe." But the tension grew like a black cloud. Sleep turned into constant armed vigil, hunger squeezed tight with the stolen cows. The 15th day brought a devastating and unforgettable microclimax. A secondary flood from previous rains soaked the base of the barn, the timber and mud softening on the east wall with imminent danger. The main beam cracked at noon with a dry snap that echoed like a shotgun blast. Rafe ran with Annie carrying bundles of hay to prop up the structure, but the beam fell, grazing his left shoulder, opening an ugly 5-inch gash that gushed hot and abundant blood. Annie tore her dress to make a makeshift bandage, tied it with the desperate strength of a mother at the limit, screaming for him to stay still while she stitched the open wound with a sewing needle and sisal thread previously boiled. The searing pain made Rafe howl like a wounded wolf, vision blurring from rapid blood loss, but Annie sang softly an old lullaby, steady hands saving his life, stitch by stitch. The wound was closed in 18 crooked but effective stitches. Rafe fainted for 2 full hours, woke up pale with Annie watching without blinking, Miguel sleeping on her chest. "You saved my life," he murmured hoarsely with a weak voice. Annie smiled, exhausted. "Now we're even, Rafe. Now we're a family." The 20th day approached slowly, routine hardening like steel in the forge. Rafe limped with a bandaged shoulder, but milked the remaining cows that Jeb had recovered from the stolen ones. Annie saw her feet healing little by little with the herbal salve, breasts filling with milk thanks to Ms. Rose's regular food. Conversations deepened at night. Rafe told of his poor childhood rising from hand to rancher at 25 with sweat and tears. Annie spoke of simple dreams of owning a home and a laundry shop in the busy town. Timid laughter emerged for the first time, the first in 18 months for him. Miguel gained visible weight, alert eyes following every movement with infant curiosity. An improvised family sprouted slowly in the heart of the muddy hell. But the central mystery approached the initial climax with growing force. On the 21st night, Rafe heard hooves in the woods at 2:30 in the morning, woke Annie whispering urgently, hid her and the baby in the highest hay behind the false wall of rusted tools. 3 shapes dismounted silently. John Jack Ferris, with 2 cronies stinking of fresh moonshine, machetes shining in the weak moonlight. "Burn it all now," ordered Jack with a thick, drunk voice. "My woman is in there with her bastard." Rafe aimed from the shadow of the slightly open door, finger on the trigger, sweating cold. But the cows mooed loud, betraying the position. The shapes mounted horses and left through the side woods. False confrontation this time, but the barn was marked with an extinguished torch driven into the external wall, a clear warning of imminent and deadly fire. Rafe locked the triple-reinforced door with extra wooden beams, heart beating in his ears like a war drum. "Tomorrow, Ms. Rose takes you to town hidden," he said to a pale Annie hugging Miguel. She refused with a firm and decided headshake. This is our home now. We fight together or we die all together. Rafe felt something new pulse strong in his veins, no longer the old void, but a fierce and protective purpose. But baby Miguel coughed deep suddenly, fever returning subtle but dangerous, and a new question burned in his mind. How much time until Jack returns with bigger reinforcements and more guns? 2 weeks had passed since the tense confrontation with torches under the full moon, and life in the Twin Pines barn had gained a routine fragile as an eggshell under heavy horse hooves. It was November 12th, 1879, the mountain autumn bringing cold nights that infiltrated through patched cracks in the charred wall, and grey days with thick fog rising from the creek at the back of the property. Rafe woke at sunrise with his shoulder throbbing under the bandage dirty with white pus, which Annie cleaned every morning with boiled vinegar, the acidic smell burning everyone's nostrils. He milked the 4 remaining cows, scarce milk dripping into the cracked wooden bucket, calloused hands trembling with a low fever that rose every night. Annie got up limping, feet healed but still stiff, breasts now full, producing enough milk for Miguel, who had gained almost a pound in 14 days, little light grey eyes following his parents' movements with a toothless and innocent smile. The central fire crackled all day, the iron pot hanging cooking cornmeal porridge with the flour Miss Rose brought hidden in her wide skirt. Low conversations around the flames revealed deep layers. Rafe told how his grandfather killed his wife out of jealousy in 1845, the body never found, the curse born right there. Annie described nights of brutal beatings, Jack breaking her arm at 20 because of an innocent conversation with the baker. Obsessive thoughts spun in Rafe's head. What if Jack returned with reinforcements from the colonel? What if the infection in the shoulder went fully gangrenous? But for the first time in 18 months, the void transformed into a fierce purpose to protect that improvised family. The full revelation of the secret came on the 16th day after the confrontation, October 28th, when Ms. Rose brought clean rags and stayed longer than usual. She sat on the 3-legged stool, deep eyes of someone carrying their own scars, and told the truth the town had whispered for years in low voices. Annie Clare wasn't the first woman to flee to Rafe's barn. In 1867, Mary Ellen, the washerwoman from the town fountain, hid there for 3 days, running from the same John Jack Ferris, then 20 years old, who beat her out of jealousy over a neighbor hand. Mary Ellen left alive, but with broken ribs and a dead soul, married a blacksmith just to escape the cruel rumors. Jack continued his wave of terror. In 1873, the working girl Rosa hid for 2 nights, left with a knife stuck in her left thigh by him personally. In 1876, the miller's daughter disappeared for 3 weeks, body found in the creek with a broken neck, and Jack vanished for 6 months to Wyoming. Ms. Rose lowered her voice to a hoarse whisper. "He don't stop, Rafe. Killed at least 4 that I know. The rural sheriff washes his hands because Colonel Ramsey owes a fortune to him from gambling debts. Annie Clare is the 5th victim. And now, with a baby, it's going to get much worse." Rafe felt his blood freeze despite the hot fire, the vision of Mary superimposing onto Annie, the phantom son hugging Miguel. "How did he create all this?" he asked with a hoarse voice. Ms. Rose pointed to the scar on her own left wrist. "I lost my daughter to him in 65. Smallpox was just the official excuse. He beat her to death." The moral truth burned like an ember. Jack wasn't a common man. He was a demon in human skin, the living curse of the ranch. The deep moral dilemma exploded in Rafe's chest that same night, while fine rain drummed on the patched roof without stopping. Reporting Jack to the law meant exposing Annie and the baby, attracting immediate vengeance on the isolated and dangerous road. Protecting in silence condemned other women of the town, perpetuating the cycle of blood and terror. Miguel coughed hoarsely at midnight, fever rising to 102 degrees despite strong herbal tea, tiny body convulsing lightly like a leaf in the wind. Annie screamed in pure desperation, breasts empty from panic, Rafe holding the cold boy despite the fever, wetting his little forehead with a cold cloth from the nearby creek. The first attempt to resolve came at dawn. Rafe rode 12 miles to town with the shotgun hidden under a wet poncho, banged on Reverend Anthony's door at 5:47 in the morning. The 58-year-old clergyman, face marked by old smallpox, heard everything in silence in the vestry lit by a flickering candle. "Report him to the sheriff now," pleaded Rafe. "Jack will kill them both." The Reverend shook his head sadly. "The colonel protects him tooth and nail." "Need concrete proof. Living witness at the station signing the complaint. Return with Annie Claire to make a formal deposition." Rafe spat anger on the floor. "She'll die before that happens." The Reverend touched his infected shoulder. "God tests the just, my son." Rafe left huffing with rage, but a seed of justice had been planted in his hardened heart. The consequences of the first action hit fast, like a raw leather whiplash. Jeb arrived at noon, sweating on an exhausted horse. "The whole town is boiling, boss. Everybody knows you went to talk to the Reverend. Jack gathered 8 hands at Joachim's general store, telling that you kidnapped his woman for bloody rituals with the baby. Promised $100 to whoever burns the barn tonight. Looks changed completely. Loyal hands like me stand by you, but the others now cross themselves when passing the road. Women at the fountain whisper Annie Claire is a witch who dried the ranch cows." Rafe felt his throat close like a hangman's noose tightening. Isolation had turned into a public and deadly prison. The antagonist's entrance came at dusk that same day, October 29th, the setting sun tinting the sky blood red over the distant Rocky Mountains. Rafe was milking the dairy cow in the outer corral when he heard heavy hooves on the red dirt road. John Jack Ferris appeared alone on horseback on a lame bay, leg bandaged from the shot days before, dirty red beard caked with earth and old booze, red eyes injected with pure and animalistic hate. He stopped 20 yards from the gate, 18-inch machete shining on his wide belt, a colonial revolver tucked in dirty trousers. Rafe dropped the milk bucket on the ground, grabbed the shotgun from the doorframe, aimed straight at the man's broad chest. "Get out of here now!" he spat with a grave voice echoing through the whole valley. Jack laughed hoarsely, showing teeth yellowed by chronic drinking. "My woman and her bastard are in there. Ain't they, Ghost Rancher? The whole town knows. I'm going to take 'em or burn it all to the ground." Rafe squeezed the trigger slowly. "Try it, and you're buzzard meat before sunrise." Jack spat a wad of tobacco on the muddy ground. "You're dead, Sutton. The colonel signs the auction tomorrow. My hands already circle the whole woods." He turned the horse slowly, vanished in red dust, but left the threat hanging like gunpowder smoke in the still air. The Savior's entrance happened naturally like a creek after heavy rain. The next day, October 30th, while Annie boiled milk for the baby in the outer trough, a chestnut horse stopped at the corral fence. A 42-year-old man dismounted slowly, face bronzed by the sun, marked by premature wrinkles, deep brown eyes of an old and painful longing, plaid shirt patched at the elbows, worn boots but still polished with care. Jeb accompanied him on foot, hat in hand as a sign of respect. "Boss," said the hand, "this is Mr. Manuel, ex-foreman of the colonel's ranch. Lost his wife in childbirth last year, lives alone in the abandoned storehouse out back. Heard the rumors and wants to help for real." Rafe lowered the shotgun suspiciously. "Why?" Manuel looked at the muddy ground, voice hoarse with still fresh pain. "My Clara died screaming in childbirth, just like your Mary. Heard from Ms. Rose about Annie Claire and the baby. Jack killed my sister-in-law in 75. I won't let him harvest anyone else on this land. I got loyal hands at his ranch, 12 counting me." Rafe measured the man for a long minute, saw his own shadow reflected in his eyes. "Stay and help," he said dryly. Manuel nodded firmly, tied the horse, entered the barn, and began helping Annie with firewood without unnecessary words or invasive questions. If you're liking this story, hit that like and share with someone who needs to believe in second chances and true redemption, because what comes now is going to squeeze your heart in a way you don't expect. The escalation of the threat came merciless, like a cruel drought in the Badlands. On the night of November 1st, a night ambush, 4 of Jack's hands attacked the corral at 2:17 in the morning, cutting the cows' ropes so they fled mooing in panic into the dark woods. Rafe woke up to the dry cracks of gunfire, ran barefoot through slippery mud, fired into the air, scaring the invaders, who fled laughing like hyenas. But 2 cows vanished forever. Milk ran out for good. Baby Miguel cried from hysterical hunger for hours, Annie without milk in her breasts due to extreme stress, Rafe riding 18 miles to Ms. Rose begging for urgent help. Returned with a milk goat tied by the tail, but Annie coughed up horse blood now, bronchitis evolving to pneumonia due to chronic humidity in the barn. On the 3rd, a sabotaged fire, hay straw soaked in kerosene, infiltrated into the soil. A slow and treacherous fire, licking low beams from the inside. Manuel discovered it by the strong smell, and everyone threw dirt and even urinated on the flames to put them out in 47 minutes of sweat and smoke in burning lungs. The barn structure tilted 5 degrees to the east side, real threat of imminent collapse. The children were threatened directly and terrifyingly. On the night of November 5th, while Rafe watched the front with Manuel, a shadow broke open the already weak back wall. Jack entered silent as a snake, machete raised over the makeshift straw cradle where Miguel slept peacefully. Annie woke with an animalistic scream, threw her thin body over the baby, and the machete grazed her left shoulder, opening a 3-inch gash that gushed hot and abundant blood. Rafe heard the scream coming from the back, ran firing with the shotgun, which missed by a miracle in the fast shadow. Jack fled through the hole limping, but taking the knife dirty with Annie's fresh blood. The wound infected instantly, red pus and fever of 105 degrees, in her at 4 in the morning. The community turned against them completely. The hands neutralized attempts at help. Reverend Anthony refused to say Mass for the sinners of the cursed barn. The colonel sent an official letter giving 48 hours to clean up the filth or face forced auction of the whole ranch. Relationship development flourished even in hell. Rafe and Manuel alternated exhausting watches, conversations in the early hours revealing naked souls. Manuel confessed guilt for not arriving in time for his wife's labor. Rafe admitted he drank whiskey to commit slow suicide and forget Mary. Annie shared vulnerabilities around the fire, trembling hands cleaning mutual wounds, trust sprouting in gentle and necessary touches. The proposal of a concrete plan formed on the 7th. Manuel would gather 10 loyal hands to ambush Jack at Joachim's general store on Saturday. Rafe would take Annie and the baby to Ms. Rose's house, hidden in the wagon, then join the sheriff with reliable witnesses. But the moral dilemma cracked the group in half. Reporting exposed everyone to retaliation. Private vengeance would kill collateral innocents in town. The final twist came on the night of November 9th, new moon blinding the dense woods completely. Rafe slept a short shift of total exhaustion, woke to Annie's desperate scream, Miguel convulsing strongly with foam in his little mouth, fever of 107 degrees from advanced and relentless pneumonia, ran to Mrs. Rose 20 miles round trip under torrential rain, infected shoulder bleeding through old bandage, returned at 4:32 with medicine from the Reverend, laudanum for the seizure and leeches to lower the deadly fever. But an additional discovery chilled everyone's blood. In Ms. Rose's saddlebag, a letter from the Colonel to Jack dated November 5. Eliminate the family in the barn by Sunday, or the debt of $500 comes due without forgiveness. Signed, Ramsey. The Colonel financed the terror personally, was not neutral. Rafe tore the letter with mute fury, a new danger emerging like a giant shadow, no longer one man alone, but a gang protected by absolute rural power. Annie woke pale, seeing the paper burning in the fire. "Are we going to die, all of us?" she whispered with a completely broken voice. Rafe hugged her tight for the first time, a real kiss sealing the love born in shared pain. Not without fighting to the end. But the baby coughed blood for the first time. The barn creaked ready to collapse, and Jack armed the merciless final blow. The final question burned like a branding iron. Betray the colonel, or face an army alone for the family? The night of November 15th, 1879 exploded in total chaos when Jack forced the final confrontation, bringing 12 hands armed with rusty shotguns, sharp machetes, and torches soaked in kerosene that rained sparks in the humid and heavy air. It was 11:47 p.m., the waning moon barely illuminating the 18 riders encircling the barn, tilted like a ship adrift about to sink. Rafe woke to the first crack of hooves in deep mud, jumped from the straw bed with machete in right hand and shotgun in left, screamed for Annie to wake fast. She lifted Miguel, who whimpered scared, wide eyes seeing gigantic shadows through the narrow crack of the double door reinforced with thick logs. Manuel was already standing, cartridge belt crossed on broad chest, 6-shooter colonial revolver ready to fire. Jack bellowed from the broken corral gate, "Come out, demons, or we burn you all alive! The colonel signed yesterday. This land is mine now!" Rafe aimed through the narrow crack, fired high with the first shot, scaring the vanguard horses that reared, throwing 3 hands into the slippery mud. But the invaders advanced without fear, torches licking the charred east wall, black smoke rising like a condemned soul to the dark sky. The main beam groaned with a deadly snap. The roof collapsed 6 feet in the center, crushing the fire. Embers flying and igniting internal hay accumulated. Rafe screamed to evacuate, pushed Annie through the back door, through the hole in the wall, Manuel covering with precise crossfire. They seemed completely defeated. Cows mooing in panic, trampling the makeshift corral, provisions burning in high flames, main exit blocked by 9 men with machetes raised, shining in torchlight. If this story is touching your heart, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share with who you love, because what comes now will restore your faith in true human redemption. The positive twist erupted like sun after an apocalyptic storm. At 12:32 a.m., the thunder of hooves multiplied. 22 loyal hands, led by Jeb, surged from the dense sidewoods, shotguns roaring in a volley of 14 shots that took down 4 of Jack's cronies wounded in thighs and arms. Ms. Rose rode an open wagon behind the group, Reverend Anthony raised on the bench, shouting with a thunderous voice, "In the name of God, stop this slaughter now!" The publicly revealed truth came immediate. Jeb raised the burnt but partially rescued letter from the ashes, written proof that Colonel Ramsey financed the personal terror, the $500 debt exposed under weak moonlight for all to see. Jack roared pure betrayal, machete raised against Rafe in the smoky doorway, but loyal hand Mr. Joachim from the general store turned at the last second, putting the revolver to the enemy's neck. "It's over, dog!" The rural sheriff arrived in a reinforced wagon with 6 armed men, iron handcuffs ready, and witnesses of the 18 hands swearing to years of crimes under solemn oath. The unexpected ally emerged then. Colonel Ramsey himself appeared on a purebred white horse, face pale, seeing the letter read aloud, shouted forced retreat to save stained reputation. Rafe found the final inner strength, stepped out of the smoke with shotgun raised, voice booming louder than any thunder. "This land is mine by sweat and spilled blood." Jack fell to his knees handcuffed, eyes injected with defeat, mixed with eternal hate, burning like ember. Resolution of conflict came bloody, but just and necessary. The sheriff tied Jack to his own horse. 7 wounded cronies surrendered without further fight after the colonel's letter was read to all. Justice done right there in the red mud. Reverend Anthony witnessed Jack's confession under gunpoint, killed 4 women over the years, beat dozens of innocent victims, burned a rival silo in 1876 for petty revenge. The community took immediate and unanimous sides. Women from the fountain screamed for justice with clenched fists. Loyal hands helped Rafe carrying Annie and Miguel to Ms. Rose's safe wagon. Colonel Ramsey signed a paper right on the spot, transferring heavy debt to the now blood-clean ranch, fleeing public shame that would destroy his influence in the region. Jack was dragged to the jail 24 miles away. Life imprisonment without formal trial thanks to the weight of the irrefutable letter. Resolution of moral dilemma crowned deep transformation. Rafe decided the fate of the barn secret, not private blind vengeance, but common good for all, opening ranch gates to mothers fleeing domestic violence, transforming ancient curse into sanctuary refuge of living hope. Ms. Rose swore to spread news through whole town. The barn would be reborn as a house of second chances for the neediest. Annie, still coughing hoarsely but eyes shining pure emotion, whispered to Rafe, holding his hand strong, "We did right. For Miguel. For folks who will still come here." The baby smiled toothlessly while smoke dissipated in clean air, a clear divine sign for all. Rafe's visible transformation shocked everyone at dawn of November 16th. Gangrenous shoulder was cut with machete, sterilized by Manuel, in 18 precise and firm stitches, fever lowered with strong tea prepared by Reverend, beard shaved with clean razor, revealing strong jaw of a man reborn from ashes. Posture erect for first time in 18 months, brown eyes alive with renewed purpose, torn shirt swapped for a fresh one, Ms. Rose sewed with Annie. Emotionally, strength pulsed in his veins, hugged Jeb in public for first time, thanked Manuel as battle brother, kissed Miguel's forehead declaring himself father forever. Socially respect conquered absolutely. Hands swore eternal loyalty under clearing sky. Town started calling him Rafe, the Redeemer. Reverend marked gratitude mass for following Sunday packed with faithful. Impact on community spread like purifying sacred fire. Twin Pines Ranch opened wooden gates to all. 3 runaway mothers knocked on door next week with bruised children. 2 babies rescued from nearby creeks gained milk and warm bed. Hands donated fresh lumber for complete reconstruction. Ms. Rose became surrogate grandma, coordinating clean clothes and plentiful food. Reverend Anthony baptized Miguel on a solemn Sunday with church packed with 200 souls in reverent silence. Colonel Ramsey fell into complete social disgrace, sold remaining lands to Rafe at fair price, and vanished from region shamed. Neighboring villages sent fresh milk and flour in regular wagons. Curse broken by kindness, transformed into inspiring legend known as the Barn of the Reborn. Temporal epilogue jumped 14 months forward to January 17, 1881, golden Colorado summer tinting Rocky Mountains in warm and promising tones. Barn reborn as solid house of new boards and bright red shingle roof, wide porch with cotton hammocks swaying in soft afternoon breeze, garden of red roses planted by Annie, rescuing living memory of Mary. Rafe, now 40 strong years, shoulder marked by scar of pride, managed prosperous ranch with 60 loyal hands, but spent afternoons playing with Miguel, aged 1 year and 7 months, crawling through chicken coop clucking after hens. Annie Claire, 26 full years, ample breasts nursing new and healthy pregnancy, ran community laundry with 12 steam machines donated by Reverend. Religious wedding happened 6 months after rescue, church packed with tall cornbread and fruitcake, square dance echoing same one Rafe danced with Mary 20 years before. Ms. Rose lived in comfortable annex house, surrogate grandma to 9 adopted grandkids. Jeb rose to respected head foreman. Manuel married a Hans daughter and formed happy family of 5 souls. Community prospered like never before. Makeshift school taught 28 curious children. Monthly fair attracted 400 noisy vendors. Curse turned into inspiring legend of eternal hope. Final reflection hammered central message with unshakable strength. Redemption is born of pain shared between strangers. Transformation requires courage to face impossible face to face. Second chances bloom when compassion defeats deepest hate. Rafe learned running from pain builds eternal prisons. Facing with love builds legacies spanning generations. Annie discovered mother's strength transcends brutal beatings, multiplies lives beyond own. Miguel, first reborn of Barn, symbolized broken cycle, from heavy family curse to collective blessing illuminating whole mountain range. Memorable closing seal journey under January 1881 sunset. Rafe sat on new porch, hugging Annie Claire with deep tenderness. Miguel, sleeping peaceful on her chest, rising and falling serene. Thunder, grazing calm, at gate open to world. Looked at golden horizon, where barn of ashes once existed, now blooming with abundant life in all corners. Whispered hoarse to Annie, we ran from pain thinking it was salvation, but found true redemption here. She smiled with green eyes inherited from strong mother, kissed him soft on lips, and we build forever together. Gentle mountain wind carried red rose petals to orange sky, absolute peace enveloping improvised family that destiny wove from moldy hay to blessed eternity.